Welcome, 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 wherever it is, whatever time it is in your universe where you're connecting to this webinar. If it's live and direct in real time, like Javier and myself and three of our wonderful friends on the line right now, and that number will click up, I'm sure. Um, it's nothing like being live and direct. So we thank you for taking the time to be here and to learn a little bit more about our friend, the FAFSA, and to get some insights and some expertise to help us navigate this tool that we have called the FAFSA. My name is Broderick Clark. I currently serve as the Vice President of Programs and Systems Quality with the National Summer Learning Association. I should also share that I'm a happy graduate student at Clemson University, so shout out to the Tigers and my friends in the Youth Development Leadership Program at Clemson University. But NSLA is the architect of this experience today. And our vision is to make sure that every single young person in America has unfettered access, meaning any barrier that might be in place removed and just out of the way so that they have access to a high quality summer learning experience, regardless of their background and income. We know that there are 26 million young people in America that qualify for free and reduced lunch, which we know don't always have access to high quality summer learning and out of school time opportunities. So we're not going to rest as an organization until we eliminate that problem, making sure that every single young person has access to a high quality summer learning experience year over year. As an organization, we provide training and support around our 5 Ps: program quality, policy, partnerships, public awareness, and the all-important people power that powers this engine. So we work to invest in all those 5 Ps all day, every day. So sometimes when people ask me, what do? I get to hang out in 5P land all day long, making sure that people understand what it means, not only to run programs and keep kids off the street, which we've graduated from that since the 80s, by the way. It's about program quality, making sure that when those young people and families do access programs, that they're met by staff that are highly skilled and that they have the knowledge and skill and the competency to serve those young people at a really high level. And so while we don't, as an organization, run programs necessarily as direct service, although we do have some opportunities I'll talk a little bit about later on that are direct service in nature, in design. We work mostly with leadership in jurisdictions, city-wide leadership, statewide leadership, intermediary organizations, youth-serving government agencies, the U.S. Department of Education, anybody that's interested in creating pathways for young people to grow and to thrive and to be healthy, both personally, professionally, academically, holistically, the whole child model, like everything. Those are the people that we want to work with. And not only give lip service to this idea of change and improving quality, but really putting some teeth into this work around how do we create systems that move the needle with respect to quality for a whole population of people. That can be done. It is being done. It will continue to be done. And we know we're on a journey that doesn't have any end, because CQI work or continuous quality improvement, there's no finish line. Like, even the best among us still have room to grow and improve. And the ones that are on their developmental pathway that need some support to really connect to those high quality practices, we're all here to help folks, thrive in that space. And so welcome if you're just joining us at this moment in time. Next slide, please. We're going to talk a little bit about the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, affectionately known as the FAFSA, the application that students complete to receive that all-important student aid to attend college or career school, vocational kind of opportunity. I will say this again, I'm gonna go to every mountaintop that I can find. It is super important to fill out the FAFSA form if you want to receive that financial aid, that all-important financial aid. I know I couldn't have survived my undergraduate years without it. Without the support that I got from my graduate school, it would have been almost impossible. And so really encourage you, if you're eligible, to please fill out that FAFSA form if you want to receive that aid. It takes most people just about an hour to complete, less than an hour to complete the form. So I know a lot of work has gone into the creation and development of this new experience that, is supposed to be a lot more streamlined, a lot easier, a lot quicker. I don't know if there's any 70s babies on the line, but I remember when I used to go to the DMV, when I first got my driver's license, going to the DMV was different than going to the Department of Motor Vehicles today. They got things streamlined. You're not waiting so long, right? So I appreciate the DMV for doing their thing. I appreciate the folks who worked on this FAFSA form to make it less arduous and more streamlined. And for it to take less than an hour to complete for most people, that's a win for sure. So shout out to everybody who moved the FAFSA from its old form to its new form. Shout out to everybody who made that possible. The information is used to determine your eligibility for federal student aid and sometimes state aid as well. So, different grants, scholarships, work-study funds, and student loans be calculated using these very intricate formulas to determine what you're eligible for. One day I'd love to study the backbone of the FAFSA and see how they do all those calculations, but maybe if anybody's interested in stats and numbers, we can join that project one day to see the background and the inner workings. But from what I understand, it's a new and improved process. Takes less of a burden for you to fill out and should be quicker, easier, kinder, and gentler for you to fill out. Next slide, please. So on your FAFSA form, you can select up to 20 schools to receive your information. It's kind of like a giant group text. Like everybody gets it. So you select the 20 of them. They'll receive your information and calculate your aid. Each school will calculate that and share the amounts and types of student aid that will be available to you. And of course, you complete the form every year you plan to attend school, and you want to do that as early as possible. Better to be early and wait than to be late and lose out. And so, fantastic. Yeah, you can go ahead and jump to that next one. As I said, it's a better FAFSA. We can let go of the way that it used to be done and really encourage you to embrace this new, simple, and streamlined approach to the form that should be easier to fill out. Of course, many people fill it out in under 15 minutes, but if you need that hour, you can still be there at the curve. It's an hour well spent, 15 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes, 60 minutes well spent. There are 7.1 million total students expected to be eligible for Pell Grants, which 665,000 more students will receive federal Pell Grants. Over 1.7 million students will receive the maximum Pell Grant. This is good news, folks. All students will be able to access the maximum financial aid for which you are eligible for. Just take a moment, glaze back at those bullets real quick. Some words that might jump out: simple, streamline, eligibility, good chance of getting the maximum Pell Grant. All students will be able to access the maximum for which you are eligible. Better FAFSA, better future. Let's go. FAFSA, let's go. Better FAFSA, better future. Let's get it done. Next slide, please. Well, timelines, the world moves in timelines, and it's really good I'm embracing the timeline model myself, making sure I know where I'm supposed to be, what I'm supposed to do. And so for right now, in this moment, students and families should complete and submit the 2024-25 FAFSA form. So don't wait, grab it, get going, become familiar with the form. If any questions emerge, there's a lot of supports in the ecosystem to help you get through that. March, the department begins transmitting FAFSA information to schools and state agencies for processing. Starting in April, colleges are going to review those FAFSAs and for students who applied for admission, and then the colleges will start sending aid packages to students starting in April. And of course, July 1, the FAFSA award year begins. Nice little note here on the person who created this slide. We appreciate the little notes and tips. And so students and families should check all the deadlines for the institutions and states regarding scholarships and enrollment commitments. So, that can be very different from space to space, state to state. So become very familiar with those so that you don't miss any critical deadlines. Fantastic. These folks here in these images on these slides are rocking and rolling with the FAFSA. You see them, they're ready to fill it out. They got pens in hand, ready to rock and roll. Checklist with your FAFSA to access and fill out the 2024-25 FAFSA. Create a studentaid.gov account. Go to www.studentaid.gov, create your account. You'll need some paperwork, the usual identifiers. So you'll need your social security number unless you are a citizen of freely associated states. You want to make sure your contributors create their own studentaid.gov account too. So who is a contributor? This is anyone who is required to provide that information on the form, such as parents or spouse. So make sure you're good to those contributors. If you have somebody that's a contributor via FAFSA, just like give them a call and say hello and just wish them an awesome day, not for anything else, because they putting their name on your stuff. They putting their name and associating it with you and your social. They want to help you get through this process. And so just give them a call and say, hey, see how they doing today. But again, if they're contributing, they're required to put that information on the form. It could be your parents or your spouse. Next slide, please. Checklist. Super important. You want to invite your contributors to your FAFSA form in electronic format. You'll be asked to provide their information as well. So you're going to need their first and last name, their social, their DOB or date of birth, their email address and mailing address. If the contributors don't have a social. And take a moment, let that sink in. Fantastic. You want to have your documents ready and be prepared to complete the form in one session. Just want to have all the stuff right in front of you so you don't have to keep getting up and the internet and computers, sometimes they could be temperamental. You got a window open for more than 20 minutes, then you get timed out and then you lose your stuff. I'm not saying that's going to happen to you in this process, but I just know it can be finicky sometimes. So if you have everything in front of you, then you don't have to do all this running back and forth, and you're just inputting the data at that point. Necessary forms would include your 2022 tax returns, record of child support received, current balances of cash savings and checking accounts, net worth of investments, businesses, and farms. Those apply to you. You want to have all those things present so you're not running back and forth trying to find documents while the electronic window is open. Of course, after submitting your FAFSA, you'll receive financial aid offer letters from the colleges that you selected. You want to look out for those announcements later this spring. And those envelopes, when they come, they're very exciting from personal experience when you find out, how much aid you're going to receive. And those barriers to access to higher education starts melting away because you have this aid. It's an actual glorious moment. The only thing I can say that probably rivals that is the acceptance letter from the institution that you want to go to, your first choice. Another tip at the bottom related to your 2022 tax return, starting with the 2024-25 form, students can provide consent and approval. So most financial information will be imported directly from the IRS, but you should keep your tax returns handy for additional questions. So it's nice that they have electronic means to connect some of these things, but it's nothing like being a little old school and having that document right in front of you, just in case there's an electronic glitch here or there and somebody has additional questions. Fantastic. So we have some tips. So here at NSLA, we're not going to just run through a couple of slides. Like, we have some tips. The tips at the bottom of the slides, awesome tips, and just a whole slide or more. So we're going to keep giving it to you. Get a studentaid.gov account before filling out the FAFSA form. You get halfway through and you get to this point where you gotta go ahead and get that studentaid.gov account before you even start. As I said earlier, have all your documents ready. You don't want to be running around looking for them. But hopefully all those documents are in a secure location in one place. If you don't do that now currently, this might be an opportunity to grab all your super important papers, and make sure that they're in a secure location where you can find them and access them. Make sure you have your contributors' information ready, right? I know everybody listening to this call or listening to this recording is going to call their contributor just to wish them a great day, to say, yeah, thank you for being a contributor. Thanks for contributing to my growth and development and success. I appreciate you. But make sure you have their information ready. If you're the student, you should complete your section of the form first. Read all the questions and definitions clearly. Sometimes it helps to read that stuff out loud. I know when I need to understand something a little deeper, reading it to myself is one thing, but when I read those things out loud, it's almost like an extra layer of depth with my understanding. And so I encourage you to read the questions and definitions carefully. Consult the informed resources if you need help. Sometimes there's a little, help button next to certain items. And when you're flowing around those electronic forms, check those out. They might have answers to your questions already embedded in the form. And don't forget to review, sign, and submit the form. It sounds like obvious to do that, but you've done these things before. You can spend all this time putting all this information in and literally forgetting to click submit. It's on the lower right-hand side, sometimes in these documents. So remember to review it completely, sign it, and submit the form. And remember that if you make a mistake, it's totally okay. You can go back and provide corrections as needed. But I'd imagine if you do all those things before, have everything prepared beforehand, review, sign, submit, all those pieces, you'll be in great shape. YouTube is a thing for sure, with all kinds of information. Like, if I want to learn something, sometimes if I want to sharpen my little guitar playing skills, I go right to an educator on YouTube. There's a bunch of YouTube videos Federal Student Aid has put up. There's a link to the video here. I don't know if we can drop that in the chat or if that's clickable on your screen there. But that would be good to connect to. They'll talk about what the FAFSA is, what's changed from the old form or the old process to the new. It'll give you a good sense of who's a contributor for you. And why do my contributors and I need our own student accounts to do the FAFSA form? it's like common questions that will pop up, somebody's a contributor for me, they might ask, why do I need an account if you already got one? So these videos will give you some insights on how to respond to that. I saw Leslie shouted out in the chat that we will share this slide deck for you all, so no worries there. It also talks about what does it mean to provide consent and approval on the FAFSA form? How do I complete the FAFSA form if my parents are divorced or separated? How do I create a studentaid.gov account if I don't have a social? And how do I complete the FAFSA form if my parent is a non-citizen? Financial aid bootcamp and how to prepare for the FAFSA form. All this will be covered in this pretty comprehensive how-to video, which can be very helpful. So I would encourage, if you have any questions, to connect to those resources first, because your answers might be embedded right there in that content. Next slide, please. Fantastic. We've gotten to the place in the agenda where I can gracefully hand the microphone over to Brother Javier Avila, who is the Senior Assistant Director and Manager of Financial Aid at Johns Hopkins University. And fun fact, National Summer Learning Association was born at Johns Hopkins University. So it's divine intervention that we're both in the same space at the same time. We love for you to share your insights and expertise on this lovely tool that we have called the FAFSA.
Definitely. Thank you for all that. I guess my role today is to answer every questions, but also provide, like you said, insight into what the FAFSA, this new FAFSA, is actually rolling out behind the scenes. As you mentioned, in 2021, Congress passed the FAFSA Simplification Act, which essentially revamped the entire FAFSA. And this is the first year, 24-25, that this new quote unquote better FAFSA is rolling out. And it is better, but as you may or may not already know, that first year of a new thing can come with a bunch of issues. And this isn't any different. So with the new FAFSA, a lot of families have encountered glitches with actually submitting the aid application. And we're actually seeing a unfortunate decrease in FAFSA submissions this year, despite the great new features. So this new FAFSA is much simpler than prior FAFSA. So there's less questions. It's a smarter tool as well. So if you answer yes or no to a question, the system learns and will ask you a separate question based on that initial question. So some students are only answering 20 questions to complete. There were about 100 questions that every single student was asked. So it's a much quicker, seamless FAFSA that is smarter as well. The new FAFSA also links contributors' information directly to the IRS. So there's no need for inputting manual data for tax returns. So that in the past created a lot of errors because families misreported income information, or it also impeded transfer. So students, when they retrieved it from the IRS data tool, there was always issues with the numbers not coming in correctly. This year with the new FAFSA, the Department of Ed is working directly with the IRS to get that information directly inputted into FAFSA, but there comes a lot of security issues and whatnot on top of that, which has also added another issue of glitches. But to the overall extent, the new FAFSA is supposed to be much simpler, and it's supposed to require a lot less from our families, from our students. This year, though, with the new rollout, we're seeing that a lot of schools were a little delayed, and you may already have encountered that with when they're receiving the FAFSA. So typical years and in future years, the FAFSA will open in October. This year, because it was the new FAFSA, the FAFSA did not open all the way until December. So that caused additional delay. So I'm sure some of you or some of your families or students are seeing delayed financial aid packages. And this is simply because the Department of Ed was unable to release the FAFSA until late December, and then the FAFSA application. Till this day, we're still encouraging all our students to complete the FAFSA. It's the FAFSA, this 24-25 school year FAFSA will not close until next year, 2025, and really actually 2026 in some cases. So I always encourage my students, if you're having issues with this current FAFSA because of the new features coming in and the glitches and the technical issues and then rollout, I always tell my students to go back into the system and continuously try to submit it. For most students, if like Roger mentioned, the FAFSA can be completed in 10, 15, 20 minutes, especially with this new FAFSA. But the biggest issues our families are encountering are issues with the submitting. So I wanted to share a few links from the Department of Ed that you can use for yourself, for your families, for your students to continuously be aware. Because oftentimes a lot of students are coming to the financial aid office to kind of ask about the FAFSA. And unfortunately, we don't have much of an update because if that FAFSA is unable to be submitted, financial aid offices won't have access to it. So the main thing you want to do is complete the FAFSA to the extent that you can. If you encounter an issue, I always tell my families to look into the Department of Ed updated website on issues. So I'm going to drop that in the chat. And this site is continuously being updated with resolutions to the common issues that Department of Ed is aware of. And this is really just a result of it being a new FAFSA coming with new issues that the department did not anticipate. And I'm sure some of your students may encounter that. Initially, some of our families were not able to create that student aid gov username and ID, and now the FAFSA, the Department of Ed was able to roll out a resolution. Another big one that I do want to share with my families is those issues with no social security number. If a parent or someone does not have a social, one of the contributors, the Department of Ed has finally found a solution to that. And I'll drop that in the chat as well, just to have a handy resource. If you work with families, maybe some of you are counselors or not, it'd be good to have this link bookmarked for future reference. Let me make sure it's typed correctly. And then the last thing I wanted to share with you all is just another useful tip, which is if after all this is said and done, like I said, the main issue we're seeing with our students right now is issues with submitting the FAFSA. Once the FAFSA is submitted, they'll be sent out to us, to the schools. And once we can see that FAFSA, we're able to retrieve it and make corrections internally or pretty much guide our students on next steps. If we don't have that FAFSA, if your families or students or you're not able to submit the FAFSA, then your best bet is to go to this issues website, look at the common issues that are aware, and then try to submit it that way. The other big thing, and I know some of my students have been frustrated with the Department of Ed, has been trying to call them, and I'll drop their number in the chat as well, just so you have that number handy. That is direct line to the Department of Ed's FAFSA site. So if you're encountering issues with submitting the FAFSA and you've exhausted all these resources, you've looked at the training videos and you really don't know why your FAFSA is not submitting or one of your students' FAFSA aren't submitting, I would encourage you to just simply call the FAFSA number at a slower time. So I would say sometime in the morning on the middle of the week is easier, so you actually get a hold of an individual on FAFSA and they'll help you submit it. And then as a very, very last resort, I'm telling my students to go in and complete a paper FAFSA. So this sort of is counterintuitive because this new FAFSA, I'll do all of that. But this is really in those certain cases where you really can't submit a FAFSA, complete that paper FAFSA application. And for that, I'll also drop in the link. And really, the way that would work is your students would complete the FAFSA form, which is still simpler and the paper version, by hand, and then mail it into the Department of Ed. And that's one way of getting it submitted if all other options are not working. But aside from that, like Roger mentioned, this new FAFSA is completely revamped to the benefit of our students. We are anticipating that an additional 660,000 individuals will be Pell eligible. So this is really encompassing a lot of our middle class families in the past who were a little over the threshold to be eligible for aid, and they complete the FAFSA and they weren't eligible. Now with the new FAFSA, about 660,000 additional families and students will be eligible for Pell grants through the federal government. So now the caveat is students need to complete it and submit it, but if you're able to complete it and submit it, you do want to be aware that the new formula is supposed to be more generous for our families. And that's a good thing overall because it is going to make higher ed a little more accessible to all our families, our lower income families and our middle class families, those who are often kind of outside of support in the past. But that is a big option. And then as a last resort is if you're worried about next year, the Department of Ed is hoping that next year will be very streamlined as well. So all your students will need to do is go on to the FAFSA site, and October 1st will be the application open date for next year. And then the last thing I tell my students is see what, because every school is a little different. Hopkins has a different financial aid requirement than other institutions. Almost every institution in the US will require the FAFSA, so that's the number one thing you want to complete and send to your school. The next thing you want to do is tell your families and your students to go look into the schools you're looking to apply to and see if there's additional financial aid requirements. The other common one, like Hopkins, is we ask for the CSS profile, which is similar to the FAFSA, a little more in depth. But that's just another thing to be aware of when you're going through the college process and the financial aid process. Complete the FAFSA, but also be aware that some institutions may ask for additional financial aid documents or applications to ensure that they can, and usually the reason why we ask for additional applications is to allocate our institutional funding, so separate funding, separate from the federal government. So now that I kind of talked a lot, the main thing I wanted to tell you all is to be aware that this new FAFSA may have some issues, but overall it should be more streamlined and accessible for all our students. And if you are having any issues, please don't hesitate to give FAFSA a call. Unfortunately, we're getting a lot of parents calling in financial aid offices, but if we don't have the FAFSA, we can't really do much until that FAFSA is submitted. So if you can't submit the FAFSA, definitely go onto the website, look at the training videos, look at the errors videos or the known issues that the Department of Ed is aware of. And then as a last resort, feel free to give them a call or have your students submit the paper version of the FAFSA so that the institutions can actually receive them and process your students' financial aid. And as Leslie noted, if you have any questions at all, I know there's not a whole lot, and Roger was pretty much thorough in what the new FAFSA changes are and what good tips there are. But if you have any questions at all from a financial aid perspective at all, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'll make sure to answer those. If not, I'll put the mic back to you, Roger, because I'm not sure if there's any questions.
It's always a good time to pause for a moment or two, let folks process. We certainly shared a lot in the last couple of minutes here.
Definitely.
But one of the questions that I'm carrying is, as we in this supportive role for parents and families, want to support them through this process of knowing what the FAFSA is and all the support that they need to fill it out. Do you know, like, what are the top barriers that folks are experiencing with the new FAFSA? Is it the new FAFSA itself?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think one of the things that you mentioned very well in that PowerPoint is in the past, not every parent had to have a FAFSA username, that FSA ID, that's what we call them, FSA IDs, or the studentaid.gov username. So this year around, parents are going in and students have their FSA ID, they go in, they complete the financial application, they submit it, which they think they sign and submit, but they never got their contributor, which is the new term they're using, which is the parent to go in there and basically give consent to the IRS to transfer data information. So one big thing, and it's key for our parents to know, and in the past it wasn't big, was having parents create their own FSA ID. And that's a key step. Is before you even start the FAFSA, make sure that the student has their FSA ID, their FAFSA account, but the parents or contributor, which is the new term the FAFSA is using, which is most students will be the parents, also have their own FSA ID account. Ideally, both mom and dad, or for the standard family, both parents would have an FSA ID account, unless one individual file taxes married jointly. Then there's really you only need to complete one FSA ID, since when the IRS brings it over, it'll jointly retrieve them. But for the most part, I'm telling all my students, before you even begin, make sure you have a copy of 2-year prior tax returns, because that's what they use, W-2s, and make sure you create that account. Number one step, because that's usually the biggest barrier. It's a whole thing, like you go into the FAFSA, you're ready to start it, and then it says, have your parent or contributor sign in so that we can send them a link, and then they don't have one, and then students just kind of shut it down there. It's like, well, my parent doesn't have another, we'll deal with it later. So the first thing before you even start, make sure all 3 of y'all have a FSA ID account, so that when you're set up, it can all streamline, go through. And the way it works essentially is the student will log in with their FSA ID account, complete the FAFSA, which should be very like 5 minutes, and then they'll indicate who's contributor number 1. They'll provide the parent's FSA ID info, and then who's contributor number 2, which is the second parent, they'll provide that FSA ID, and then via email, parent 1 and 2 will get an email that says, hey, your student is asking you to help complete the FAFSA, and you should be able to go in there, complete it, give consent to the IRS to retrieve that data, and it's pretty much that's it and done. For most students, it will take anywhere from like 10, 15 minutes. And then each parent again, 10, 15 minutes. So very, very quick. I was helping a bunch of my students and we were able, I think the quickest we did was 5 minutes. We got in there, parents had their FSA ID, we just rolled through it. But the biggest thing is creating that FSA ID account.
Totally, totally. Thank you for that.
Of course, of
Um,
course.
and as I was listening to you speak, I was reflecting on my experience with the FAFSA. This was a long time ago. And I believe that I was in that category that just fell right outside of the spectrum to get some help and some assistance. Um, but we really needed it, but we didn't qualify. We're right on the margin. And so like to hear you say that so many more families that were in that situation that I was in years ago would actually qualify for this aid. I'd imagine that there are people who think that they wouldn't qualify
Yes,
necessarily. They're
I
not.
think,
So any
and
thoughts?
that's a big thing. I'm telling all my students, some people feel like, oh, the FAFSA is really only for low income families. I'm not going to be eligible for it. No, I'm telling all my students, it's a free application. It should only take 5, 10 minutes. Complete it and see what you're eligible for. Because this year, the formula, it has been completely revamped so that for the most part, I would say 95% of the new, individuals who are going to start receiving Pell now, I think is the number is like about 660,000 new individuals receiving Pell. About 95% of those are middle income families, and a smaller percentage more of the lower income families that were missed in the past. So really, this new formula is supposed to encompass more of American society to ensure that it is accessible. Because I mean, college is much more expensive. So that is a good point to say this new
Totally.
formula should help. So this year, all the issues may have hindered a lot of students from completing it, but we're hoping that next year it's going to be even more streamlined. There's no more issues, no more glitches with it. Students will be aware, and those students who have in the past families were like, oh, don't complete it, we're not eligible for anything, might be aware, like, oh, your friend who's similar to us actually received some aid, maybe let's complete it as well. But again, the application is open, so if you have questions or if families who aren't sure, tell them to complete it. There's no negative to it. I did see Christina mentioned in the I heard there's a lower number in FAFSA applications. It's also affected applications and admission rates. Unfortunately, yes, and that's the big concern. And this is a lot of the work that we as financial aid professors are doing, you guys, and NSLA are doing, and a lot of the work that community members are doing is trying to get students to complete that FAFSA. The initial glitches did prevent a lot of students from completing it, and really it off put a lot of families. Families put it aside. And this year, I believe I don't have the actual numbers, but I believe we're around 7 to 8 million FAFSAs completed, which is a really good number. But in the past, around now, we would be about 13 million. So there is a huge reduction in those FAFSA completions. A big part, we're just hoping that a lot of families have not just been completely discouraged and they're just still trying to resolve those glitches. So we're hoping that families, like some of our students here at Hopkins, I'm telling them at Hopkins, we have our own application, so it's not the biggest consequence or repercussion if you miss it. But I'm telling my students, when you get the chance, hop on that phone call the FAFSA number, and see if you can work out that issue you're having with. And it might be like a simple thing. Everything looks right, and when they click submit, there's just like an error popping up on the page that is preventing them from submitting it. So I'm just telling my students, go in there, try to get a hold of an actual person in FAFSA and see if they can help you with that. But for a good majority of the other students, it's been pretty streamlined, so no issues at all. But those smaller percentage has been a hindrance to those students. And the worry is that students who are in most need of FAFSA, because those are the ones who are encountering all these issues, are not completing the FAFSA, and that might just widen, general social gaps where those who need it most aren't getting access to those funds. But hopefully that is resolved. Maybe not this year, if worst case scenario, but next year and future years, we go back to a new baseline where, okay, everyone knows that the FAFSA works and more middle income families are going to be able to take advantage of the FAFSA.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for all of those insights. Um, and so, we're in this moment right now. It's hard to believe we've been talking about FAFSA for 41 minutes so far. So I appreciate all your insights you've been sharing. But this webinar will close out in just a few minutes. And maybe about 2 hours from now, something will click in your head and you're like, I wish I had told them this. What do you think that thing would be?
It's a very good question. I think it's hard to kind of, in hindsight, everything becomes clear.
Sure.
Uh, but right now, I think that the main thing is really just encouraging students to complete the FAFSA, to the extent that they, just it's sort of like a broken record player. We're telling everyone complete the FAFSA, complete the FAFSA, complete the FAFSA. But really, the big thing here is where we really are hoping that this new FAFSA will not completely revamp, the whole world, but it will make college more accessible, especially now that just higher ed is so expensive in the United States. And this little change will hopefully bring in more accessibility to our students, our middle income families, or lower income families, to make sure higher ed is still accessible to all our students. And, to be fair, the United States of America has one of the greatest higher ed programs in the world. The accessibility might be an issue, but we still have one of the best universities ever. So I do tell my students that if you feel discouraged, I have family members who are going through the college application process, and some of them are like, "What's the point? The FAFSA doesn't even work. Will I even get A? I don't even know if I'm going to get A, and I already know I got accepted, but should I even, commit if I don't have my financial aid offers?" And I'm telling them, yeah, the worst you can say is later we can kind of cross that bridge later. But the best thing is set up an appointment with financial aid advisors if you can now, but complete the FAFSA to the extent that you can. And some financial aid advisors, depending, on your schools, they may be able to kind of provide you an estimate. So even though the FAFSA might not be fully processed now, you're just unsure of how much aid you're going to get. Financial aid advisors, we do know the formula behind it. So if you provide us some information, we may be able to work with you and your family to kind of give you an idea of, hey, so this is what your Pell Grant will look like. It's not going to be exact because it may change once we actually process it. But if you have any questions about, committing to a school, you're not sure, I always tell my students, talk to the financial aid office, see if they can provide you an estimate at the very least, so that you can kind of make those decisions with a little more knowledge. And don't feel like, oh, I can't access college because I don't know what my financial aid offer will be.
Totally. Thank you for that. I mean, to rest on a basketball analogy, like you miss every shot you don't take, right? So, why not put your name in the hat, submit your information, submit the FAFSA, and let the numbers crunch and come back with hopefully some great news that will eliminate any financial barriers to you accessing this great higher education we have here in America. So fantastic. Well, Javier, thank you so much for sharing your time with us, sharing your wisdom around the FAFSA, and also sharing your words of encouragement despite any challenges or glitches that undoubtedly come with any new approach or any new system, growing pains, that we can get through this together and ultimately make it easier for generations to come to be able to access this much needed federal student aid. So once again,
100%. Thank you for having me, of course.
Absolutely. So with that, I want to thank everyone who is on here live and direct. Thank you all for providing some questions there in the chat. Thank you to everyone who has accessed this recording to get access to this knowledge and information. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you to every family that listened to this and ran out and got their student.gov ID and all that information set up. Thank you to everyone who listened to this and ran out and completed their FAFSA, put all that information in there. And I can leave you with a word of gratitude for you doing that, but also as a fellow student this year and next year, let's do this. And en route to graduation, taking that tassel and tossing it to the other side, getting that degree and getting to work. So I appreciate your time, your energy, your attention, your passion, your presence on this call. Go fill out that FAFSA. And if you're a contributor for someone, thanks for doing awesome stuff for somebody else. You know what I mean? We appreciate you very much. And we'll see you on the next webinar of sorts. Once again, we're the National Summer Learning Association, NSLA for short. We appreciate your time, energy, attention on this call. And we'll see you next time.
Have a good one.
You too.